If you've been diagnosed with sleep apnea, if you're sleeping with a CPAP every night, or maybe you got diagnosed, but you just can't get yourself to strap a machine on your face and sleep this way for the next 30 or 40 years, maybe you haven't done a sleep study yet, but your loved one told you that they think you may have a big problem and that you should get tested because, well, they were scared when they heard you stop breathing last night. I don't know. I want to have a conversation with you that I don't think enough people are having. My question is fairly simple. Where's the sleep apnea rehabilitation? I'm Dr. Doug Willen. I've spent the past 28 years taking care of people in my clinical practice here in New York City, and I'm the author of a book called Apnea Mass. And I've spent years studying breathing, airway health, sleep apnea, and breathing rehabilitation. And I also coach more than 100 people who went on to objectively retest their sleep apnea, and under the supervision of their own doctors are now off CPAP therapy. But I want to be very clear about that. I don't believe everybody can get off CPAP. I don't believe there's one exercise, one breathing technique, or one device that's going to cure everybody's situation, everybody's sleep apnea. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this. I think the conversation is incomplete. For many people, it goes something like this. You have a sleep study, you receive a diagnosis, you're prescribed a CPAP. Maybe you receive something different, like an oral appliance or device to wear in your mouth while you sleep. Maybe surgery was discussed. Those can all be appropriate treatments. You know why? Because they work. They all work. But then the conversation often stops. And I think that's where another conversation should actually begin. And that is, what can you improve? What can you strengthen? What can you train? What can you change? And after you've done that sort of rehabilitation long enough, trained the problem to improve, to strengthen consistently, what happens if you objectively retest and measure again? That's the conversation I call apnea rehabilitation. That's what my whole book is about. Several years ago, I was sitting in my doctor's office when he looked at my blood work and he told me, you have type 2 diabetes. My hemoglobin A1C was 6.6, which is high. He wrote me a prescription, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. I remember leaving his office thinking, is this it? Am I just diabetic now? Am I going to have to take metformin, the medication, for the rest of my life and accept that this is just who I am? Yeah. I decided I wasn't going to look at the diagnosis that way. Instead, I spent the next year rebuilding my health. I lost 25 pounds. I've been able to keep it off. I changed the way I ate. I reduced my alcohol dramatically. I exercised 5 days a week. I got stronger. I slept better. And today I no longer meet the criteria for type 2 diabetes. My hemoglobin A1C has been stable at 5.6 for years now. I'm not telling you that story because everybody with type 2 diabetes can do what I did. They can't. I'm telling you because the way we think about the diagnosis when someone develops type 2 diabetes, look, nobody just says, here's your prescription, we're done. No, that's not what's happening. With type 2 diabetes, people will talk about nutrition. They will talk about weight, exercise, maintaining muscle mass, sleep, stress, metabolic health, right? And then we measure again. You can retest. There's a possibility that you could reverse your type 2 diabetes if you get your shit together and you roll up your sleeves and apply yourself, right? There's an expectation that while medicine treats the disease, the person with the diagnosis should also work on becoming healthier. Not everybody does it, but it's possible. So I started asking a very simple question. Why don't we approach sleep apnea with that same mindset? Let me make something absolutely clear. I'm not anti-CPAP. CPAP is the gold standard for sleep apnea. It works. My own father has successfully used a CPAP for more than 15 years. It saves his life. It's amazing. If your CPAP is treating your sleep apnea, use it. Work with your sleep physician. Treat the disease, but while the machine is treating your disease, what are you doing to train the person wearing it? Because you're not an AHI score, you're not a diagnosis, you're not a machine, you're a human being. You have a respiratory system, you have breathing muscles, you have a tongue, lips, cheeks, throat, and airway, you have a nervous system, you have a metabolism, you have a cardiovascular fitness level, you have body composition, you have sleep habits, you have stress, and many of those things can be influenced or trained. They can be rehabbed you would need to do the work, dig deep and get it done. And that's why I believe these two ideas can exist at the same time. Treat the disease, wear your CPAP or device, protect yourself, be smart. But you can train the person wearing the CPAP or device. You can train inside your diagnosis. One does not have to replace the other. If I were diagnosed with sleep apnea today, I would give myself 1 year. Not 30 days, not another quick fix, not another gadget. 1 year. I would make rebuilding my health one of the most important projects of my life. I would train my breathing. I would learn how to primarily breathe through my nose. I train my diaphragm and my respiratory muscles. I'd strengthen and improve the function of my tongue, lips, cheek, and throat. I work on my breathing regulation and CO2 tolerance. And if needed to lose weight, for example, I'd work on it. If my cardiovascular fitness was poor, I'd build it up. It can improve at any age. If alcohol was hurting my sleep, I'd address it. If stress was destroying my sleep, I'd work on that too. Not because any one of those things is a magic cure for sleep apnea. No, because rehabilitation isn't one thing. It's the accumulation of many things that can make you a healthier, more functional human being. And while I was doing all that, if that was my goal, I would measure. I'd monitor my symptoms. I'd monitor my snoring. I'd monitor my oxygen level when appropriate and when I could. I'd pay attention to how I sleep and how I feel during the day. And when the time was right, I'd go back to my physician and objectively get retested. Maybe I'd still need to remain on a CPAP. I don't know. Maybe my air pressure requirements could change. That would be good. Maybe another treatment would become appropriate. Maybe I would eventually test my way off of all sleep apnea therapy under my doctor's supervision. That would be cool. I don't know. And that's precisely the point. You don't know what's possible until you've done the work and measured again. That's what we teach here. Over time, I needed a way to organize this work. So I began looking at rehabilitation through 3 major areas, 3 buckets. There's a breathing bucket, a mouth bucket, and a sleep bucket. I call it BMS. Breathing is the first bucket. It includes things like breathing regulation, nasal breathing, respiratory muscle function, CO2 tolerance. Then mouth. Mouth is the second bucket. It includes the tongue, lips, cheeks, throat, swallowing patterns, and oral posture. Tongue should be up there in your palate, except when you're eating or sleeping. Sleep is a third, and it includes the behaviors, the lifestyle factors, recovery, stress, fitness, body composition, and other factors that can influence how you sleep and how well you sleep. And not everybody needs the same amount of work in all 3 buckets. 2 people can both have sleep apnea and have completely different training priorities. And that's why I don't believe rehabilitation should simply be, here's an exercise. Everybody do it. Everybody do it the same way. Rehabilitation should give you a framework for understanding what you can work on and where your individual training priorities may be. One of my mentors told me something almost 30 years ago that I've never forgotten. He would say, as you build health, you become less sick. Think about that for a minute. I've watched that principle play out for decades, not only with breathing, but with chronic pain, mobility, blood pressure, diseases, energy, strength, confidence, quality of life, and my own type 2 diabetes diagnosis. Because as I built my own health over an entire year, my type 2 diabetes diagnosis went away. I've rarely watched someone's life change because they discovered one little perfect exercise. However, I've watched lives change because people consistently did hundreds of small things and became different human beings. And that's what I'm asking you to consider. What would happen if you gave yourself 1 year? Not a year to obsess over sleep apnea, a year to build yourself. I want your spouse to notice how much you change. I want your children to notice. I want your doctor to notice. But most importantly, I want you to notice. I want you to see that you became stronger, healthier, you breathe differently, you sleep differently, you have more endurance, you understand your own body better, and you stopped waiting for something to change because you started actively working on the things that you could change yourself. And that's why I created the Exhale Method and the breathing gym. And it's what this YouTube channel is going to be about. I'm not just going to teach you about sleep apnea, I'm going to teach you how to train within your diagnosis for sleep apnea, for snoring, for mouth breathing. If this stuff interests you, please subscribe and stay connected. I built a complete training system around these principles with breathing exercises, respiratory muscle training, myofunctional training for the tongue, lips, cheeks, and throat, and practical strategies for better sleep and recovery. And we're going to talk about CPAP. We're going to talk about oral appliances. We're going to talk about what the research actually says. And we're going to separate reasonable rehabilitation from miracle cure nonsense. Because I refuse to believe that receiving a sleep apnea diagnosis should be the end of your conversation about your health. It should be the beginning of a different conversation. And I don't believe everybody should start training in exactly the same place, because two people can have the same sleep apnea diagnosis and very different training priorities. So before you start randomly just doing exercises you find on YouTube, I want you to identify which areas may deserve the most attention for you. That's why I created the breathing, the mouth, and the sleep assessment. It's free. It takes just a few minutes, and it'll give you what I call the BMS, breathing, mouth, sleep profile, showing your current training priorities based on your answers. You may discover that breathing, for you, appears to be your highest priority. For someone else, it may be the mouth, it may be sleep. We won't know until you do your free assessment. Or you may have significant challenges in all three areas. The point is, don't guess. You'll find the link for the free assessment below this video. Take it. Save your BMS profile and use that as the beginning of your training roadmap. I don't know what your sleep study will look like 1 year from now, and neither do you. And I won't promise you that you'll get off your CPAP. Not everybody does. But I will challenge you not to spend the next year doing nothing except what? Managing the diagnosis? Treat the disease, absolutely. But train the person wearing the CPAP. Build your health. Measure again. Eventually, you'll be ready to get retested. That's apnea rehabilitation. That's the exhale method. I'm Dr. Doug Willen. Now let's get to work.